Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are once again updating the Survivor 42 power rankings following episode 9, and we got quite a bit to talk about, as obviously we got the split tribal, so 2 people were voted out. We also had a very interesting conversation during the second tribal, and edit-wise, there's quite a bit to chew on as well, so we got quite a bit to go into, even if the actual boots weren't too exciting. But let's get right into the list. So starting off the list at number 10, we have the first boot from the split tribal, and here we have Roxroy. And it's not too surprising for him to go out in such a fashion here, where in episode 9, he has a confessional about how he and Jonathan have been working hard. Even so, no one cares that the men have been providing, and he needs to do something about it. Approaches Jonathan and Mike about working with each other and the other guys. Later tries looping in Hai and Omar, but those two are not on board, which was a pretty worrying sign for Roxroy's fate. Has a confessional later on about how he has most of the guys he approached for the alliance on his team, says that guys are more rigid in making decisions, so he's banking on that, which was a really not good quote for anyone to say. He's confident Mike is voting with him, however, he is voted out unanimously, with even Mike voting him out. And overall, I was never high on Roxroy winning the game. I did think he was somewhat in consideration after the premiere, where he got that set up towards him potentially adapting over time, but as the season went on, it became pretty evident that that storyline didn't really amount to anything. Or even in this episode, I mean, with him talking in the premiere about how he needs to be more adaptable, he talks in this episode about how men are rigid, so again, sort of goes to show how he wasn't really an important part of the story here. And again, he did seem like a relatively easy boot. Now, I think it'll be interesting moving forward because obviously his boot directly influenced the other tribal. However, I also think it'll affect things moving forward in the sense that he was technically part of the majority alliance, and with the majority seeming to turning on each other, plus there was talk in this episode about how the men's alliance has seemingly just formed, would be feeling like they turned on each other after the split tribal. They aren't going to be aware of what has happened. So those are things that could influence the game moving forward. But as for Roxroy himself, he was never really a top contender for me, and he's here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we actually have the other boot from the double tribal, and here we have Tori. And coming into the episode, I was expecting Tori to be voted out if she didn't win immunity, and while that did end up happening, obviously the way there was a bit strange and unusual. So in episode 9, she's asked by Hai if she voted for him, which she denies, which is technically the truth. Later on, Marianne tells her about the Drea plan, has a confession about how she's pleased with this and as it gives her hope about moving forward, despite seeming like an easy vote against her. After Drea announces she's playing her idol during Tribal, says she's not changing her vote. After Jeff decides to make the tribal public, she decides to play a shot in the dark, as it's made pretty clear that everyone's going to vote her out. However, the shot misses and she's voted out. And on the whole, like I said, I mean, Tori was never a top contender for me. I was a bit curious to see if she could survive this round, as I felt like this split tribal was going to be a very precarious spot for her, as it opens up the door for easy targets like her and Romeo to be voted out. And to her credit, it seemed like she was on track to survive this tribal, as it seemed like the plan was genuinely going to be to put the votes on either Drea or Marianne. But obviously what ends up happening is Drea and her team walk into the tribal and they see Roxroy sitting on the jury bench immediately after being voted out, which prompts her and Marianne to get very emotional, start to get worried about the perception of 3 black players getting voted out in a row, being the first 3 members of the jury, prompting that entire conversation, prompting Drea and Marianne to say that they'll play their idols, which essentially meant that Tori was screwed in that situation, obviously forcing her to play her shot in the dark. So again, she did get a bit unlucky with the order in which she went to tribal, as obviously Jonathan won the immunity challenge, allowing her team to go to tribal second. I feel like if that weren't the case, had they gone to tribal before, like there's a good chance that the plan probably would have been a bit different than what it actually ended up playing out as. But given the circumstances, I don't think Tori would have survived too much longer regardless. So because of that, she's here at number 9. And with that, we are now moving to the 8 players remaining in the game. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely it is that they'll win the game. And this bottom half of the list was a bit tough for me to put together, largely because of the state in which the game is in. And I sort of alluded to this a moment ago with the Roxroy being voted out. However, I think what's going to end up happening this next round is that the big alliance is going to splinter. I mean, this feels very similar to the post-merge of 41, where you had this big, seemingly not well cohesive group, like voting in the majority the first few rounds, but then ultimately fracturing shortly after the split tribal. And I feel like we're on track for that to take place this season as well, especially with talk of Marianne flipping and other situations and just the general cracks that have formed here. And I think the split tribal does contribute to that as well. I mean, it's very possible that the group will come back together and they'll probably wonder why Roxroy voted out someone who was in this alliance versus Romeo, who was a very easy target. So I think there's plenty of opportunities for the alliance to crack this week. So it's just a matter of figuring out who the first victim of that is going to be. So with all that in mind, let's get into number 8. The person I think is the least likely to win Survivor 42 after this episode is Hai. And the main reason I have Hai this low is because I feel like he is probably in the most danger coming into this next round, assuming that the majority alliance does crack, as he was a pretty pivotal piece of that alliance. And now with the cracking, he's going to be in a lot of danger here. But also the edit just has not done him a lot of favors lately. So in episode 9, he asks Tori if she voted for him, but denies it, has a confessional about being upset about it, and suspects it was Romeo. I mean, it was Romeo to his credit, but then Romeo says in confessional that the reason he voted for Hai was to make him squirm. It was entirely a hinky vote, and that is confirmed by Hai's behavior with him demanding to know who the vote was, which just isn't a good look for Hai in general. The next day, Hai tells the Alliance that Romeo should be the next boot, given how he lied to him. Roxroy approaches him with the Alliance, but he rejects it. He says he doesn't want to be in a misogynistic alliance, while Roxroy himself is someone he doesn't trust, is too domineering, and only talks when he feels like talking. But he goes on to win immunity for his team, tells Omar that he's open to blindside Roxroy, but he would need to tell Mike in order to preserve his trust. Sure enough, he has that conversation with Mike. He says he needs the vote to be strategic, but he needs to include Mike in the vote, talks to Mike about the vote, and ultimately Hai does get its way here, where Mike is the one who is hesitant about voting out Roxroy, but ultimately goes along with the plan. They vote out Roxroy. So this was technically a better episode for Hai in the sense that he gets his way with the vote, but you still had that negativity at the beginning where Romeo is able to get into Hai's head by throwing that hinky vote at the previous tribal, and that's just not a great look in general for Hai to have. And as I said, the main reason I have him at the bottom is that moving forward, I don't see much path for him, both edit-wise and within the game. I feel like he's going to be in a lot of danger at this next tribal unless he wins immunity, which, again, when he's up against Jonathan, I mean, that's going to be a bit of a hard prospect. Now, to his credit, he is one of the better challenge competitors, but again, with this majority alliance seemingly cracking, I wouldn't be surprised if Hai is a potential target here. So those are the big concerns that I have, and a big reason I have him here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and again, we have another person who I think is going to be in a lot of danger moving forward. However, the main reason I have this person a bit higher is because, 1, I feel like they are more likely to win immunity, and 2, they do have slightly more allies within the majority, so they have a bit more to fall back on, but also the fact that their edit was pretty bad, plus they're a pretty big target, is a big reason why I have Jonathan here at number 7. And again, this was a terrible episode for Jonathan, really on all fronts. So in episode 9, he's approached by Roxroy about working together, has a confessional about wanting to do it, given how the big guys are often targeted, goes on to win immunity and reward for his team, thus allowing his team to go to tribal second, which ultimately proves to be very significant in the outcome of the vote. Has a confessional afterwards about how the teams could be good for him, says he had to put his ego behind him and not be too assertive, but now is his opportunity to make a big move. Tells Marianne he wants to flush her as idol, and proposes getting the Takus unified while telling Drea that the target is her. However, he does tell Marianne that she would be the decoy target, which is pretty bad as, for one, obviously Marianne is already someone who's been established on the show to not have the best relationship with Jonathan, which is, again, expounded upon here. However, the other issue is the fact that there is a very easy decoy target in Tori, and obviously had Jonathan told Marianne that Tori was the decoy target, then she would be a lot more on board with this. Now, we do hear Jonathan say that he wants to also flush Marianne's idol at the same time, but still, when you're trying to get the talk who's on board and you've made it clear multiple times that Marianne is at the bottom, it's just not ideal. Later on, he talks to Drea about the Marianne plan and getting rid of the idol, as I said, and then he talks to Lindsay about the plan, where she proceeds to point out all the holes in it. She points out how they should be splitting the vote, and as opposed to him just trying to throw all the votes onto Drea for whatever reason, despite Drea having at least an idol, but also all these advantages. Not to be fair, he doesn't know that, but still, Lindsay is pointing out to him that he should be splitting the vote. However, he refuses to do this because he thinks that Tori and Drea are on the same page, that Tori would leak the plan to Drea for some reason, and that he would try to get Drea to play the idol regardless. And we see Lindsay's perspective on this, where we see Lindsay calling him annoying. We hear her call him bad at the game strategically, and all the while, all we hear from Jonathan is that the reason he wants to do all this is because he wants to make a big move. However, considering the fact that it's a bad move with a lot of risk, compounded with the fact that the show goes out of its way to explain all the risks associated with this vote, is very, very bad. And then we get the tribal, where obviously we have that conversation takes place. Obviously Drea announces that she'll be playing her idol. We had that entire conversation about race. However, Jonathan is still supposedly on board with voting out Drea here. Like, he doesn't like hearing the idea that Drea is going to be playing her idol, ensuring that they get through another round. And we even hear him sort of interject in this race conversation, saying that this could come off as people like him, like being racist, which is obviously another terrible look. I mean, he promptly gets blowback from it as a result. And then obviously at the end, for all of his talk of making a big move, he doesn't even get his way here. Tori goes out. And in general, this was a very bad episode for Jonathan, really across multiple fronts. I mean, his comments at Tribal itself were pretty bad. I mean, I get why he would say that. Like, I kind of get his perspective, but at the same time, it's pretty clear that it's not the right side of the argument here. And obviously he gets a lot of blowback for it, but that's not the main reason why the edit is so bad for him. The main reason is that he's undercut repeatedly in this edit, where before the tribal, I mean, he's coming up with this plan that's clearly flawed, and yet he's doubling down on it. He's pushing back against people saying he split the vote. He obviously makes the mistake of telling Marianne that she's a decoy vote versus Tori. And obviously we hear both Lindsay and Marianne say that this is bad. I mean, Lindsay in the sense that this plan is bad strategically, and Marianne saying that this once again demonstrates that Jonathan is domineering, that he doesn't value her, and again, setting up foreshadowing for Marianne flipping moving forward. And just in general, just Jonathan's association with this Big Guys Alliance, which in general just got completely thrown under the bus in this episode, with even people like Kai saying that's a misogynist group. Obviously, Jonathan's association with that is all very bad. So again, this was a very, very bad episode for Jonathan, both gameplay-wise and edit-wise. And moving forward, I mean, if we're continuing with this line of logic that the Majority Alliance is going to crack, Jonathan's going to be in a ton of danger. I mean, if we're assuming Marianne's going to flip, I can very well see Marianne wanting to target Jonathan specifically. We've seen Marianne talk multiple times about her bad relationship with Jonathan at this point. And again, I feel like Jonathan and Hai are probably in the most danger coming to the next round. But the main reason I have Jonathan above Hai is because I have more confidence in Jonathan to win immunity than Hai. Now again, that's not a bad thing against Hai, as we saw him win immunity himself, but obviously Jonathan in general is being propped up as his challenge piece, and I feel like Jonathan is more capable of winning immunity moving forward, but that still is going to paint a target on his back moving forward. So it's all looking pretty bad for Jonathan at this point. This is quite the downfall for him, both edit-wise and even now projecting forward into the game. So it's looking pretty bad, and that's a big reason that I have him here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have someone who came into this round as an easy target, and for a while seemed like they could have been the boot here, but now that they survived, I feel like they are probably going to be in it towards the end game, and here we have Romeo. And obviously, Romeo had a very bad episode last week, made it pretty clear that he's at the bottom of the group. And obviously, he came into this round as another easy target. This split tribal round in general was just a very bad spot for people like him, as it presents an opportunity to take out easy targets. And we see that in episode 9, where he thanks the tribe for keeping them, first of all, has a confessional explaining his hinky vote. He says that he voted for High specifically because he wanted to get High to squirm, which he does succeed in, so that's something at least. Gets to explain about how he admits to being lied to and called fake for getting votes at the previous tribal. After the challenge, has a confessional about how this was his worst case scenario, as he doesn't gel well with most of the men out here, and we see that with Roxroy going right after him right at the bat, and has a confessional about how he'll need to trust High in order to survive the vote when he doesn't actually trust High himself. But aside from that, he doesn't get too much content in terms of saving himself. I mean, it did seem like he was going to be in danger when Mike was committed to staying loyal to Roxroy, even though he says that Roxroy was someone he'd be fine with voting out. It was just more so of Mike keeping his word. However, by tribal, I mean, Romeo is ultimately spared over Roxroy. And like I said, I mean, coming out of the split tribal, I mean, Romeo is seemingly in a good spot, especially if the majority alliance does crumble after this point. I feel like that'll give Romeo some room to maneuver moving forward, and I feel like he'll probably be in it for a long time at this point. Again, going back to my thoughts on him in the pre-merge based on his edit, I felt like there was a storyline there for him to get towards the end game. However, it wasn't really a winning edit, and I think that will largely hold at this point, where I could see him like getting to final tribal and being a losing finalist, possibly due to him not really making many big moves. Even though we are getting strategic content from him here, it's just a matter of whether he will be able to maneuver accordingly or whether he'll be someone who's dragged along. And it's not looking great for Romeo, if I'm being perfectly honest. Again, I feel like he's been undercut so many times in the edit at this point to where I think he will be a losing finalist. However, now that he survived this split tribal, he's probably going to be in a decent spot moving forward. So because of that, I have him here number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5. And it's sort of weird to have this person this high considering I don't think they're actually winning, but that's just the way things are at this point. And here we have Lindsay. And this was an okay episode for Lindsay. Where in episode 9, she has a confessional about almost beating Jonathan in the immunity challenge. She's also happy given Taku's in control of the numbers, and Tori seems like the easy target. Jonathan talks to her about the plan. Mind you, she was the last person to be included on the plan among the Takus, but she is very quick to point out the risk of Drea playing her idol and getting out Marianne. She tries to propose a split vote plan, but Jonathan absolutely refuses this, saying Tori isn't trustworthy and would tell Drea about the plan. And then she has a confessional about how hard it is to work with Jonathan and how he's an alpha male, doesn't understand the game strategically. And after Drea and Marianne play their idols, she is in a very tough spot where she is one of the two options to go. And if Tori's shot in the dark had hit, then she would have been screwed. However, the shot doesn't hit and she is saved for the round. And on the whole, this, like I said, this was an okay episode for Lindsay. She is shown explain the issues with Jonathan's split vote plan to vote out Drea. Like, she points out all the flaws in Jonathan's game in general, which was good hearing from her perspective. However, in terms of her overall fate in the game, it's not looking great, especially if that alliance cracks. Now, I could see her potentially being a blindside sooner or later, or if not, someone that gets through like the final 6, maybe someone that falls victim to do or die. You know, like, there are a number of options I can see Lindsay going down. However, one of those options that I don't think it is the winner. And actually, I don't think she's getting to the end either, so that's another knock against her. But considering the field that we're talking about here, I feel like 5 is a good spot for her. Now we're moving on to number 4. And again, this is another person where it's sort of crazy that they're this high on the list, as I don't think they're actually winning. However, this was a somewhat positive episode for them. And here we have Drea. And again, this was a solid episode for Drea, where in episode 9, Jonathan talks to her about the fake Marianne plan. However, obviously we know that the real plan is for him to try to take her out with her idol in her pocket. Has a confession about saying she's on board, except she notes how it's a red flag that they're targeting people with idols, obviously given she has an idol. which prompts her to get a bit suspicious about all this. But obviously, we then see her get to Tribal, where we see her reaction to seeing Roxroy on the jury sitting next to Chanel. And obviously, it's very evident from her facial expression that she's torn up about it, and which leads her into talking about the race conversation that took place in the episode, with her talking about the perception of 3 black players being voted out in a row and being the first 3 members of the jury. We see her getting very torn up about this situation and her fearing that she could be the next person going out, or if not, voting out Marianne, and again contributing to this pattern that she's very upset by. And this leads her to announcing to the tribe that she is playing her idol tonight, regardless of what's happening. And obviously this leads Marianne to also play her idol. She plays her idol, and then through that we see Tori being voted out as a result. And on the whole, this was a good episode for Drea. Obviously, she takes center stage during this conversation at Tribal, bringing up a lot of these important social issues, which was pretty good for the show, my personal opinion. And obviously, we see her waste her idol here. However, I actually think she didn't really waste it. I feel like she might have actually needed it, as I feel like if it wasn't for the situation that happened at Tribal, there is a decent chance that she gets the most amount of votes there, to where she would need to play her idol in order to be safe. So obviously at the end of the day, she does make the correct decision there, as she probably would have needed the idol regardless. Even so, it was interesting to see how this all unfolded at Tribal, with her getting this upset about seeing Chanel and Roxroy on the jury. And obviously Marianne is another key figure to that. And it was very nice seeing Drea talking about all these issues. However, I don't feel great about her moving forward either, as obviously she still has a lot of her advantages. She still has her amulet. She still has her knowledge is power. She still has her extra vote. She could potentially use the knowledge is power on Mike to get an idol that way. However, I don't feel like her edit on the whole is contributing much to a win. I feel like she could survive the next couple votes with the majority alliance cracking. However, I feel like there will come a point where she'll be seen as the biggest threat and taken out as a result. So I still don't think she's actually going to win, but this was obviously a pretty big episode for her, and she's here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and it's actually the same top 3 as last week. However, I did adjust the order a bit given how the edit played out here. But at number 3, I actually decided to put Mike. And admittedly, I had Mike at number 1 for the last 2 weeks. He's been in the top 3 for a lot of the season. However, this was not a good episode for him, if I'm being perfectly honest. In episode 9, he's approached by Roxroy about working together, has a confessional about wanting to do so, given how the big guys are often targeted. He knows they'll need to turn on each other at some point, but he's happy to stick with him for the time being. After the challenge, he wants to stick with Roxroy. Hai talks to him about voting out Roxroy. However, he tells Hai that doing so would cause the rest of the alliance to not trust him, has a confessional about talking about how important his word is, and how he admits that Roxroy wouldn't be a tough vote, but he's already given him his word. On the other hand, he is loyal to Hai, so he's having a bit of a dilemma, and then ultimately he votes out Roxroy in the situation. And on the whole, this was not the greatest episode for Mike. Obviously, the first element of it is the fact that he does not get his way here, in that he votes out Roxroy even after saying that he wouldn't do so. So that's a knock there. But obviously, this episode is also a pretty big knock for the whole idea of the big guys working together, which was previously presented in a positive light, particularly around the merge. However, since then, obviously in this episode, we hear Hai literally refer to it as a misogynist group. And obviously with Mike being very well associated with that, that is not a good look to have. And obviously with the majority alliance crumbling, I feel like Mike, despite not being the direct target coming the next week, I feel like he very likely could lose one of his closest allies. I mean, he is close to Jonathan, he is close to Hai, the two people who I think are in the most danger coming to the next round. Plus, there's the fact that Drea now knows that Mike has an idol, and with Marianne playing her idol at the last tribal, along with Drea playing her own, that leaves Mike as the only other person in the game that Drea knows has an advantage, and through that, Drea could use her knowledge as power to steal Mike's idol. Now, granted, I don't think Mike losing his idol would be that bad at the end of the day. However, it's still not great, and I feel like with him potentially losing one of his allies at this next vote, I feel like that doesn't put him in a great spot. And then plus, this edit just was not great for him in this episode. However, I still think he has a strong enough edit from the rest of the season. Plus, I think he still has plenty of room to maneuver to where he could recover from this. I feel like I am willing to give him the benefit of the doubt from this episode, but it's not looking great at this point. And I feel like the top two people had more positive episodes. So because of that, I had to leave him here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and it's actually the same person I had at number 2 last week. And here we have Omar. And again, I've been very high on Omar throughout a lot of the season. However, I've always been hesitant to leave him too high because of how perfect his edit is. It just feels too perfect for it to actually be a winner's edit. However, there's still a lot of great stuff in it. So in episode 9, Roxroy approaches him about the Guys Alliance, has a confession about how Roxroy hasn't talked game with him at all up until that point, and he's skeptical about how getting down to the wire with Jonathan, someone who can beat him in challenges, would not be good for his game. After the challenge, has a confessional breaking down the split tribe dynamics, notes how Roxroy got an all-male final 5, says Romeo may be a dead man walking, but Romeo is loyal to him, while Roxroy is not flexible, which is confirmed in the episode. He talks to Romeo about how he's in danger, tells him they should go for Roxroy, texts to Hai about blindsiding Roxroy, and then ultimately he gets his way and Roxroy goes home. And again, it wasn't the biggest episode for Omar in the world. However, it was still pretty positive for him in that he does get his way and he does get to talk about various elements of the game. It really is one of these people that talks down about the idea of the alpha males working together. And plus, this didn't really involve him directly, but I did note how during the race conversation that happened at the second tribal, how we hear them talk about how Omar in particular is concerned about being a Muslim player in the game, how before him there was never a Muslim player that made them merge. So I felt like that was another moment that really highlighted Omar's qualities on the season. You know, like someone who is a very strong player, someone who is very interested about making the season be about representation and ensuring that these demographics that have historically not done well in games like Survivor are propped up and are given the opportunity to do well here. So that was something else in his corner at least. But like I said, in general, Omar has had a pretty solid edit up to this point. However, it just feels a bit too perfect for me. I've said that multiple times now in the series. So because of that, I can't have him in number 1. I'm putting him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I think is the most likely to win Survivor 42 right now is Marianne. And it's sort of crazy that I have Marianne at number 1 this week, as I felt like for a lot of the season, she was being set up as this big character. And while her setup for her flipping on Taku has been set up for a while, I mean, I didn't really think it would lead much to a win. And to be fair, even now, I feel like she's not a guaranteed winner. Really, I don't think any of these top 3 are necessarily guaranteed. However, I think at this point, they are the clear top contenders. And I feel like with Marianne, she has now had 2 solid episodes in a row. I mean, she did have a solid merch episode as well, but I feel like this episode really helped her out, winning chance-wise. So in episode 9, Jonathan tells her about her plan to flush Drea's idol, which she is initially on board with. That is until Jonathan says that he's going to tell Drea that she is the decoy vote, which prompts her to have a confessional about it, saying that Jonathan is treating her as someone to be pushed around. Jonathan is getting on her nerves, and then she tells Tori about the plan, including the fact that Jonathan said not to tell anyone. During the scramble, tells everyone she doesn't want to vote out Drea, as she doesn't want 3 black people to be voted out in a row. And obviously at Tribal, she is a part of that conversation that takes place. She very much sympathizes with Drea, doesn't want to see her go out, or really her go out either. And then she plays her idol along with Drea's. And similar to Drea, I think Marianne getting rid of her idol here probably is for the best, as I feel like even if this situation didn't happen, that there was a decent shot that maybe Drea could have used her knowledge as power to steal her idol. I thought that was a very real possibility beforehand. Or, of course, Marianne could straight up get idol out of the game through Drea. So I feel like her getting rid of the idol here, plus getting Drea to also play the idol, while not her intention, is probably a net positive for her game, as it now means that Drea won't be looking at her as a potential target for the knowledge as power. And I still think she is probably going to flip at this point, probably to target Jonathan. She is probably going to be a factor in the majority alliance crumbling. And I feel like through that, she could be in a solid position moving forward. Plus, I feel like her edit has been pretty strong as of lately, especially since the merge. I feel like it's really been picking up, which is all very good for her. She still has that strong premiere, which made her a strong contender to begin with. And I feel like now she's looking pretty strong. So I feel like she is definitely a top contender at this point. I am not counting her out by any means. However, again, these rankings are bound to change. I feel like a lot of this is going to be based on how this game starts to play out from this point, especially once it starts to crumble. It's a matter of whether she can really build something for herself after the majority alliance crumbles to ensure that she's in a spot to get towards the end game. Can she do that? I think it's possible, but we're just going to have to see it. But for right now, based on everything that we've seen, I feel like Marianne is the most likely person to win Survivor 42. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And we're entering an interesting point now with videos coming out. Obviously, Big Brother Canada is about to end. Stay tuned for that, along with postseason coverage. The Circle starting next week, so I'm probably going to be covering that as well. And I do actually have a general Survivor video planned for next week. I'm probably going to release it around Wednesday, so stay tuned for that. I'm very excited to share it. And I think you guys might like it. So again, we'll see what happens with that. A lot of stuff coming out moving forward. But for now, that is the video. See ya.